Senator Warren, would you put limits on any limits on abortion?
I would make certain that every woman has access to the full range of reproductive health care services, and that includes birth control, it includes abortion, it includes everything for a woman.
So, political candidates often prefer not to give direct answers to certain questions. But this reply by Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren is an interesting example. She didn't refuse to answer or change the topic. She actually gave multiple answers at once. A reply is something you give, but an answer is something you hear. Over the course of this video, I will look at a few examples of dodged questions and the strategies behind them, focusing on the multi-candidate debates rather than town halls and interviews. If you are aware of a dodged question that was not seen in this video, it is definitely because I have an agenda in favor of that candidate. I am trying to piss specifically you off and sink all the candidates I don't like, and all 47 of my subscribers are in on it. There is no way I simply missed that interview or town hall, but you can drop links to dodge questions in the comments if you want. I get few enough comments that I do actually read all of them. So with that in hand, let's turn back to Warren. I have had a few people tell me that the reply Senator Warren gave is clearly an answer. She is saying she would not place any restrictions on abortion. But if it turned out that Warren actually did favor some restrictions on late-term abortion for whatever reason, or maybe wanted parental consent for pregnant teenagers under a certain age, would that contradict the answer she gave? Probably not. This reply would satisfy a Democrat that supports abortion without restrictions, but it could also satisfy a slightly larger group within the party, those that favor a few restrictions but still identify as pro-choice. By avoiding a hard no, she avoids alienating Democrats in this second category, and instead invites them to read into the word healthcare. If you don't see late-term abortion as healthcare, then there is wiggle room in Warren's answer that could allow her to walk it back later. On Warren's campaign website, in speeches and op-eds, she very much relies on the word Roe, even going as far as to say that Americans have a right to Roe. Of course, she doesn't literally mean that you have a right to your own Supreme Court case, but her choice to use Roe and not abortion is interesting, since the Roe v. Wade decision does not protect abortions after viability, and actually says explicitly that states can enact total bans past this point, provided they make an exception for life-threatening situations. Roe is a symbol, or a verbal abbreviation, meant to signal general support for abortion rights, but not necessarily abortion with no restrictions. Now, there very well may be some other Warren interview that I missed from her past in which she is more explicit, but the point here is her use of verbal symbols like the word Roe. She is saying, I support what you support. I am on your side and I am fighting for people like you. This feeling of solidarity is what counts, not the precise details of abortion policy, which would likely only affect a small minority of those who would consider having an abortion. Compare Warren's answer to Julian Castro, who spoke just before her.
Secretary Castro, this one is for you. All of you on stage support a woman's right to an abortion. You all support some version of a government health care option. Would your plan cover abortion, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, it would. I don't believe only in reproductive freedom. I believe in reproductive justice.
Castro had the ability to be more explicit with his answer because the question he was asked was not as specific as Warren's. An explicit answer to a vague question still leaves a vague result. But he still needs the symbol and a feeling.
In reproductive justice.
What does that mean specifically? Who knows? I could even imagine a pro-life person appropriating this phrase. It's powerful, memorable, and importantly, it does not tie him down to a specific policy stance. Castro does give a direct reply to the question.
Yes, it would.
But it is when it becomes vague and symbolic that his answer actually becomes powerful. I will fight for people like you. He, like Warren, is trying to speak to many people with various views on abortion at the same time. Restrictionless abortion and mostly restrictionless abortion are mutually exclusive categories. But Castro and Warren can capture both of them with their word choice. Sometimes the use of symbols isn't done as smoothly.
I'll give you 10 seconds to answer if you want to answer the direct question. Would you support a 70% individual marginal tax rate? Yes, no, or pass?
I would support a tax rate and a tax code that is fair to everyone. Tax capital
70%?
At the same rate that you tax ordinary income. Take that corporate tax rate up to 28%. You would generate the revenues you need to pay for the programs we're talking about.
That's time. Thank you.
This example is a much clearer refusal to answer a question. In the research for this video, I had the chance to speak with Arshad Hasan, a principal at Convey Communications, who has spent years training progressive candidates, especially women and people of color, in their public presentation and interview skills. He put it to me like this.
Most of the public votes are based on checklist of issues. Debates, however, are structured as a checklist of issues. So I think you completely nailed it. The candidates, a good candidate is going to establish not that they check off all the boxes, but there is a theme so that voters can get a good impression of them. And so I would support a candidate who I don't have to agree with them on 100% of all the issues. There's nobody who's 100% on all my issues, almost, pretty much. But if I feel like I can trust you to fight for me, that's more important. I think most voters feel the same way.
When Julian Castro is asked about abortion, he says his healthcare plan would cover it, establishing which side he is on. So when he says reproductive justice, that is understood through the lens of a candidate that just said he would cover abortion. When Beto refuses to answer the direct question, his fair tax line has no established premise behind it, and no context with which to interpret it. It is all response and no answer. Not knowing what Beto valued could be the main reason he is no longer in the race, and why he had to take a Hail Mary throw on gun policy later in the process. The other common way that candidates don't answer questions is when they try to make themselves a symbol of something, or establish a clear theme. You want to become that guy who does that thing, instead of checking a list of policy boxes. The clearest example of a candidate hammering the same thing again and again, despite the question that was actually asked, is Tulsi Gabbard.
You've said you would sign back onto the 2015 deal. Would you insist, though, that it address Iran's support for Hezbollah?
Let's deal with the situation where we are, where this president and his chicken hawk cabinet have led us to the brink of war with Iran. I served in the war in Iraq at the height of the war in 2005, a war that took over 4,000 of my brothers and sisters in uniforms' lives. The American people need to understand that this war with Iran would be far more devastating, far more costly than anything that we ever saw in Iraq. It would take many more lives. It would exacerbate the refugee crisis. And it wouldn't be just contained within Iran. This would turn into a regional war. This is why it's so important that every one of us, every single American, stand up and say, no war with Iran. We need to get back into the Iran nuclear agreement, and we need to negotiate how we can improve it. It was an imperfect deal. There are issues like their missile development that needs to be addressed. We can do both simultaneously to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon and preventing us from going to war.
Hasan explains that candidates have limited time and that voters do not recall everything that is said in a debate. So candidates want to establish a theme. If the question you were asked does not lend itself to developing that theme, just answer a different question. It is not uncommon for candidates to give really good answers to questions that they were not asked.
But a lot of my work centers around, answer the question you want to answer, not the question that's asked to you. That's like an age-old, technique when we train politicians. Answer the question you want to answer, not the question that's asked to you. But it's not simply because politicians are feckless or risk-averse or whatever else. It's sometimes that the constraints of the question itself are either too limiting or the assumptions underlying the question need to be challenged. So because you only have 7 seconds to answer, and because the answer to this question is just much more complex than it takes 7 seconds, get people to focus on the thing that you need them to hear. So a theme allows you to even be able to guess on an issue without even knowing that issue. So a theme is more of a, understanding where that person is coming from and how their thinking affects, where they arrive to a policy. Right, but it's also sort of a style. So like Warren a theme isn't simply left. Warren's theme is I have a plan for that. But really ultimately what that gets you to is the why and allows you to predict, to get to know that person. And that's what's important for a voter. The voter wants to know if the candidate shares their values, if they feel like they can trust that person, not so much the voter coming here with a 17 item list and checking off the boxes.
Gabbard wasn't asked about her service or her opinion on regime change wars, and didn't say whether the Iran deal should address Hezbollah or not. This Hezbollah question is a checklist question that no one will remember, but it gave Gabbard an opportunity to further cultivate her theme as the no regime change wars candidate. She essentially responded as if she had been asked, "Congresswoman Gabbard, what would you like to talk about? What's on your mind?" Joe Biden uses the symbol of Obama, or at least tries to, but the utility of the symbol has been repeatedly challenged.
The Obama-Biden administration deported more than 3 million Americans. My question to you is, if an individual is living in the United States of America without documents and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
No. Depending if they committed a major crime, they should be deported. And the president was left in his... President Obama, I think, did a heck of a job. To compare him to what this guy's doing is absolutely, I find, close to immoral. But the fact is that, look, we should not be locking people up. We should be making sure we change the circumstance, as we did, why they would leave in the first place. And those who come seeking asylum, we should immediately have the capacity to absorb them, keep them safe until they can be heard.
A 15-second, if you could, if you wish to answer. Should someone who is here without documents, and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
That person should not be the focus of deportation. We should fundamentally change the way we deal with things.
President Biden, as a presidential candidate in 2008, you supported the border wall, saying, unlike most Democrats, I voted for 700 miles of fence. This is what you said. Then you served as vice president in an administration that deported 3 million people, the most ever in U.S. history. Did you do anything to prevent those deportations? I mean, you've been asked this question before and refused to answer, so let me try once again. Are you prepared to say tonight that you and President Obama made a mistake about deportations? Why should Latinos trust you?
What Latinos should look at is comparing this president to the president we have is outrageous, number one. We didn't lock people up in cages. We didn't separate families. We didn't do all of those things, number one. Number two, by the time this is the president who came along with the DACA program. No one had ever done that before. This is the president who sent legislation to the desk saying he wants to find a pathway for the 11 million undocumented in the United States of America. This is the president who's done a great deal. So I'm proud to have served with him. What I would do as president is several more things, because things have changed. I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come. I would change the order that the president just changed, saying women who were being beaten and abused could no longer claim that as a reason for asylum. And by the way, retrospectively, you know, the 25th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act is up. The Republican Congress has not reauthorized it. Let's put pressure on them to pass the Violence Against Women Act now. But then we'll go back.
You didn't answer the question.
Well,
the question is, did you make a mistake with those deportations?
The president did the best thing that was able to be done at the time.
How about you?
I'm the vice president of the United States.
If Biden represents a return to the Obama years, then what does that mean? If your parents were deported during his administration, then that likely represents something very different to you than to someone who benefited from Obamacare. And if I am reading Joey's face correctly, he is as aware of this as I am. Symbols need maintenance, and Obama, like most symbols, can mean lots of different things. There are many other ways that candidates don't answer questions, and for other reasons. Sometimes they pivot to de-emphasize something that might be problematic, but which they are not in a position to take back.
Mayor Buttigieg, you've been struggling with issues around race in your own community. You've also said that anyone who votes to re-elect President Trump is at best looking the other way on racism. Does that sort of talk alienate voters and potentially deepen divisions in our country?
I believe what's deepened divisions in the country is the conduct of this president, and we have a chance to change all of that. Look.
And sometimes they just don't feel like answering and just kind of want to talk about what they want to talk about.
Would you cut a deal with the Taliban to end the war, even if it means the collapse of the Afghan government that America has long supported?
Well, let me just say this. One of the big differences between the Vice President and myself is he supported the terrible war in Iraq.
But typically a candidate will use a symbol to speak to multiple constituencies at the same time, or try to establish a theme for themselves, and the question they were asked doesn't facilitate that process, so they just answer a different question. But really, the debate format that's normally used is pretty dumb, and it lends itself to this sort of thing, and doesn't really help candidates distinguish themselves or help voters understand what the candidates stand for. If you ask a very specific question, it should be directed to all candidates instead of just one or two. Candidates should be given planned time, say 5 minutes each, to ask questions to other candidates. Or better yet, have candidates take turns being on a hot seat, where each other candidate gets to ask them several questions over the course of a few minutes, and the only role the moderator has is to keep people on time. Also, bear in mind that if you believe a question was answered, but someone disagrees, then there is probably something more interesting happening than that other person just being stupid. The candidate simultaneously answered and did not answer the question. A candidate can only give a reply. Whether that reply is an answer is up to you. Listening is an active process, not a passive one. Replies are given, but answers received. Candidates and the people that train them know this, and you should too.
The other was on Guantanamo Bay. She said right away, definitively, she wants to close it, but the question was how. And, there I kind of thought she's so prepared, she has so many details in her mind, but instead she sort of went to this larger talk of American ideals and foreign policy. Does it matter whether a candidate supplies direct answers and details to these questions, or do voters, Amy Walter, want this big vision and sort of lofty rhetoric?
Voters want to understand the value system of these candidates. They aren't getting into the weeds on these issues in the way that these candidates do. They want to feel like those candidates have thought through this, that they do understand the elements of the issue in front of them. But really what they need to deliver is, and this is the challenge for candidates at this stage of the process, but this sort of optimistic, forward-looking, a vision, a narrative, who we are as a country, who we can be as a country, and that the rest of the policies fit into that.